yeah, as I already shared, today will probably be more of a less structured meetup than the previous meetups. So today will probably just be more of a review, and maybe everybody can just ask, like if you have burning questions, probably we can figure them out and maybe discuss a bit about like what's important for IHP next year. And yeah, but I can start with a short presentation on the kind of a recap of what happened in IHP this year. Yeah, so let's start with that. Yeah, actually, what I found surprising is how many actually when I did start with the presentation was how many releases we did. Actually, I mean, it's we did 9 releases in the whole year, which is, I think, quite a lot, especially since every release really contained a lot of stuff. So I kind of put together like a kind of short timeline, just so we can see where we started at the beginning of the year and now where we kind of ended up with. Yeah, so actually the first release in this year was a version 0.8. It was actually mainly a kind of feature release where with a couple of new stuff like the HTTP cache, new adapters for the mailing system, chat constraints and all this stuff, and a couple of new functions. But yeah, I mean that's cool. Actually one of the smaller releases. Then one of the the next release was actually a month later, version 0.9, and this one was actually, I think, one of the kind of introduced one of the new major subsystems into IHP, which was the IHP logger module, written by Zach actually, or if I remember right. And we also added the first few plugins to IHP, which later some of them actually later moved into IHP Pro, like the IHP Sentry plugin. Because initially last year we set out to try out, okay, does it make sense to have like a plugin ecosystem, but it turned out so far it doesn't make sense. So so basically we did the first two plugins, but so far it seems actually it doesn't make sense in the sense that we aim to have an integrated framework, and having a plugin ecosystem is kind of sometimes work against that, because some of the features you probably just want into the core system and not as a kind of plugin, like from npm, where you have to install 10,000 packages just getting anything started. We kind of aim to be not that, and so like the early plugin idea was probably not convenient in that sense. Yeah. What was also new was the WebSocket servers. So previously, before that release, we didn't allow any kind of custom WebSocket servers. So that finally, that was back then one of the often requested features, and now it was kind of finally possible to do that, because I mean before that only had auto refresh to do any kind of dynamic stuff. And also one of the super important things that was auto route finally became more dynamic. In the beginning of the year, actually, auto route only supported data structures where you had like, for example, only UUIDs or something in the data structure, and didn't allow string, like mixing it up with strings. So if there was a UUID field and a string field, it didn't work. And this was finally fixed. This was like one of these like things that we always knew was like not nice, but always hard to touch, kind of. And yes, someone finally solved it in February. And and also database transactions, kind of super important actually for a production-ready framework. I mean, it was previously possible using SQL functions, but there were no high-level functionality for that. And besides that, also lots of functionality like set just, which is, if you not have used set just, it's really useful helper function. We should probably make it more visible. It's really useful. Yeah, look it up if you have not used it. You will probably use it after this meetup then. Yeah, and actually, beginning of the year, we also, which I in beginning of the year, actually, we did the first IHP meetup, and I felt like already this was a longer time ago, but it was only this year when we started doing IHP meetups. And yeah, and this was one of the picture at the right was one of the I think funniest logos made by Lars. Yeah, where he compared IHP with PHP, which is, I think, a kind of a good comparison. And yeah, and if you have been there, we also had a talk by Lars, by Zach Wood about the about the lifetime of IHP requests, explained based on his edX iOS project. Yeah, and after that, a month after that, actually, before the next IHP release, we actually had the second IHP meetup again. This time with Henry Lambert. We explained a couple of IHP design patterns, and here this was one of the slides I found funny because his answer was basically you should make IHP your first hire in your team because it's it's a pretty good kind of to work on your team. And and we also had a second talk by Finn, who shared a little bit about the details because he last year worked on a client project with IHP, and he just shared his experience with that, which I found also very interesting to hear. Actually, he's sadly not here today, but he's also been pretty active early on in the IHP community. They did the first IHP meetup before we did our IHP meetup, so like they did like the unofficial ones in Norway. And that was I think also really cool. Actually, we have a quite strong community in Norway, it seems, which is interesting. Next after that was version 0.10 release. Actually, back then a couple of people thought, okay, like 0.9 now it's going to be the 1.0 release, but that didn't happen. And in that release we also added, I think this was like one of the cooler changes, that we automatically create indexes for foraging key columns, which is like in production super helpful because otherwise, like when you query the foraging key columns, it will always be slow. This made it default fast, basically. So it's basically just super helpful when your tables get larger, to have that on by default. We added like several improvements, like debounce file changes was something that was always a bit of a problem when working with Git or something where it changed a lot of files in a few moments, and then the dev server was always like getting hung up and stuff like that. We added cache busting, which is also super useful. There's this asset path function, which is also, if you now create a new project, it's already used in the boilerplate of the new project. But if you have an old project, you might not actually know that asset path exists. It's just a function that has a cache busting. So if you kind of like of the old people using IHP, you might not know about that function, but it's super useful to add to your project. Also, the background jobs dashboard was also added from Zach from his cache from his ethics project. Also super useful if you work with jobs. And then we also, that was in beginning of the year, it was like something we've been talking a lot about, is how to be able to submit forms without all the turbolinks stuff. That was always like bit of a trouble initially. And we actually finally figured that one out and added a good solution kind of to fix that. Before that function exists, basically we always had that question come up every month or something, that we didn't had a good. I mean, there were a couple of hacky solutions, but some of them were not working well, and then we finally fixed it in a good way with that release. And there's this form with our JavaScript helper now to also just do that. Shortly after that release, we could announce that we were affiliated with the Haskell Foundation, which I think has also been just good for being part of the larger Haskell ecosystem. The Haskell Foundation was actually initiated in late 2020 by Simon Peter Jones, one of Haskell's designer, and the affiliation in general just means that we are aligned with the Haskell Foundation's goals, and which is broadening the adoption of Haskell, which is basically our kind of goal as well, and to just work together to improve the ecosystem. So generally, this means basically what we've done so far is basically we had a couple of calls, for example, and then I tried to push our like what's important for us in Haskell, which I think is, for example, error messages. Like if we could improve Haskell error messages, that would probably just be good for IHP in general. I mean, there's a lot of other kind of things for other people in the Haskell ecosystem, but for us, I think error messages would be super helpful, just because we aim to make IHP useful for people that don't have any Haskell experience, basically, and for them it's like Haskell error messages kind of like keep them getting stuck sometimes, and I think if we could get Haskell to where Elm is in terms of error messages, this would be a huge accelerator for the adoption. So I kind of try to push that in our communication with the Haskell Foundation always. After that, we did the next IHP release, which actually also contained a couple of major major features, basically really big major features. Like we had joins, which was one of the things we previously didn't really had, because I mean, I always did it like with the raw SQL query if needed, and I think it's kind of sometimes a bit complicated, but it was contributed externally, and then we were basically able to do that. We also had the server-side components, which is still experimental, but I think it's just a cool idea. So we shipped it in that release initially, and on top of that, we also had the new file storage module, which allows you to upload to S3. So it's actually quite a big release with that, and also added like case-insensitive operations, which were needed. For example, when you want to log in or something, we had a couple of issues with the productions, and kind of added it to IHP. After that, like around a month after, we actually launched the new IHP partner program, which is like where we bring together like the kind of people in the ecosystem that offer like top-notch IHP development and consulting. So far we have companies you probably already know if you've been in the previous IHP meetups. All of them are like early adopters of IHP, contributors to IHP, kind of like the experts. If you need to do an IHP project with where you don't like, or for a client, for example, you need some expertise from elsewhere, you can just talk to the partners, which is SysOS, Comlan, and Cellocate. All of them have really good experience in delivering IHP projects. So that was really one of the major things also this year. It took actually quite a kind of a bit to actually figure out how the partner program is structured and to finally ship it, and then so that's really one of the major things. Then we had the next release after that, which also contained like some of the also just some of the features are like kind of really like few major pagination is like something which is now used by default in every IHP application that's created newly. Job timeouts also, of course, I mean, you can't really do it without them. But you just missed the first release kind of. Classic course policies was one of those things people needed when they were working with lots of JavaScript stuff, specifically, or when building APIs and stuff like that. Also, XML support was added, which we needed for adding some single sign-on stuff, which was done with XML. So we actually added XML stuff, and also unique indices were previously not supported. From the schema designer, basically, you had to do it with the SQL. After that, we had to actually after quite basically, I think at that point we were like in the monthly release cycle for a while. We had to we had some improvements for the file storage system. We added the Minio backend. Before that, we only had S3 and local backend. We added a way to send attachments to IHP Mail, which is also kind of needed. There's this new view helper we added, actually, also super helpful because previously there was only a date time, but now there's also, and there was also a date already, but there was no time. So there was date time was the missing one. And also someone contributed, Handy was that, actually, I'm not sure if she's here today, icons in the schema designer. The icons at the left in the schema designer were added back then. Before that, there were no icons. And after that, actually, one of the major things that turned out really well was we worked on the new IHP logo. I know some people, like we had some controversial talks about the new IHP logo back then, and but I think it's large improvement compared to beginning of the year, where we were with like the whole kind of how IHP looks in the communication and everything. There was lots of improvements on that side. So that turned out, I think, really good. Also, especially the website was relaunched after that, which you can actually see later turned out to have a big effect on the GitHub star growth of IHP, which was interesting. Also, at the same time, we launched the IHP Pro and IHP Business subscriptions, which is, I think, also a major thing. I mean, we aim to find a good long-term way how the incentives are right for IHP to be developed in the long term. And that was kind of like something also we took quite a while to get it together, and then we could ship it in summer. Also, in that release, we had the scheduled jobs, which were just super useful to have, actually. Here you can also see the old IHP logo, which was it worked at the time, but I think the new one is a lot better. It's like it just looks much more modern, and we added custom file upload limits. I think because some people had hit that, we added the email confirmation feature, which was also kind of super useful for authorization. The file view helper was always missing, so that one was also finally added. And I think one major thing was the Git pod integration, which really helped new people that just want to try out IHP, just to try it out faster, because you don't need to install it, you don't need to install Nix, you can just try out in Git pod. It takes maybe a minute or something to start up. Then you can just try out the dev tooling and hacking and without any kind of yeah, kind of stuff. So that's kind of also kind of cool, yeah. And here was one of the one of the graphics actually when we launched the Dev subscription. Actually, we talked with a lot of people actually back then to kind of find a way how IHP can have the right incentive infrastructure for kind of long-term development. There's, I think, a lot of trouble. I mean, recently with the log4j issue, like in general, how open source software can be developed in a sustainable way, and we kind of, I think, found a good way in the sense that we we just turn open source users into open source kind of, or into customers actually. And so instead of like you kind of relying on someone's free time, you're actually a customer and you can expect features to be put in or put up on the roadmap if you ask for it. And also with bugs, you kind of can expect, like, if you rely professionally on IHP, you can expect also to kind of be your request be handled professionally in a way. So it was actually surprising because at that point we didn't really know how it turned out in terms of development. I mean, something like this can be risky in when we have an open source kind of framework, but I think it turned out pretty good actually, in terms of like adoption and people not kind of hating it or something. We had a couple of people criticize it, but I think most overall it was pretty positive. After that, we had another IHP meetup. It was also super interesting. Chris Shankula showed us how they built an kind of learning platform for the university, and it was interesting kind of to see how they teach students with an IHP-based platform. And also we had Philip show his CO2 database project, which you might have seen somewhere already. It's actually also pretty cool. After that, we had another release actually again with Stripe payment support. This was like one of the major features a lot of people asked for. Finally, accept money with IHP projects. That was finally shipped together with the Docker support, which was also one of the most requested features. It's like very easy now to ship IHP applications to Docker. It took actually quite a lot of refactoring to get there, but I think we now have really great build improvements. Actually, in the release after that, we also did some more build improvements, but generally now it's really good. And we added some new zero functions, like also OG meta functions you can now set. We added like HTML error messages, which was nice. We finally get the documentation search. This was like one of the longest features I think we didn't really had very well solved. Always we had like some search before that, but it was, I think, at some point broken, and then it was fixed, but then it was broken again, and we finally got the good Agolia search. And it's really good. Like it's so helpful that we added it. It's like one of the I think under big impact things we've done that didn't actually take that much effort time-wise versus other features, but did turn out very well, kind of in terms of improvement. Besides that, we did we also added like the automated migrations, which was one of the features we always wanted to have, basically. But it was basically the approach was like we had to decide between two approaches. One is like tracking all the changes in the schema designer you do. Basically, whenever you add a column, you just track, okay, you added a column, and after a while you can generate some migrations based on that. Or there's the other way, which most frameworks do it, is diffing the schema with the actual application database and looking what's different. And we first did the first one, and we actually changed it later on because it turned out to be not working so well as we thought. So we actually implemented both ways and shipped both actually. Also in that release, we added a new API reference design. Basically, now it looks like this, which was
quick question, Mark.
Yeah.
So in terms of the migrations,
yeah,
you guys landed on the diffing approach.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The latest IHP version uses the diffing approach. So the previous approach was really we really tracked whatever you've done and wrote it into another file and just keep track of that basically. And when you generated the migration, we just used that. But the problem was when you have that file and you, for example, switch between branches, it typically messes up the file. And so while in theory, I thought, okay, this approach is just better because it can be more correct, right? If you track the actual changes, you can, in some cases, be more correct because when diffing, you sometimes cannot generate. You don't have enough information to generate like the perfect migration. Sometimes, in very few cases, basically. But yeah, it turns out in practice, actually, the diffing is better because it in most cases it just generates better migrations and it has no problems when switching branches and stuff like that because there's no state saved somewhere. It basically is a kind of stateless solution. So I mean, it only relies on the database state, but that state you have anyways. So yeah, and yeah, so yeah, but yeah, actually, also the interesting kind of sharing for experience was I initially thought the first approach is simpler because it's like simpler also technically in terms of lines of code actually, but turns out diffing actually has fewer lines of code. It's actually even simpler to implement the diffing. Yeah. So if you ever get, oh yeah.
I was gonna say prior to this, I had been using a script called, I think it's called Migra, and it does a, it's like a Python script that diffs two databases, and that's what I was using to keep my production database up to date with whatever my changes were in development, and it was working pretty well. It got a little hung up on like, in production we install listeners on various tables for auto refresh, and it would detect those and try to stick those into the migration and have to clear those out. But my experience with the diffing approaches is really good, so I'm glad it's being built into the system.
Yeah, we're also improving kind of like that. It actually turned out that there are even besides the auto refresh stuff, for example, that setups this. Now there's also other stuff that kind of generates like, I would say, noise in the migrations, and we've been working on proving that also, even besides, in like the most recent version, and probably there's a bit more changes coming before the next IHP release as well, because there's even stuff like the schema migrations table itself, which IHP uses, which sometimes, I mean, it's a new table that's not in your schema SQL, so it's kind of also generating diffs and stuff like that. Yeah. So so the current system still probably needs a bit of fine tuning until it generates like the perfect migrations. But I think we get there before the version 1 release. Yeah. Yeah, but so the learning is, if you ever get to implement a web framework, it makes sense to just try the diff approach. It just works better. Yeah. And that we were that was like the new, it's actually cool to it's just CSS changes, kind of. It's still the Hadoop, but it's I think it just looks so much more modern compared to normal Haskell documentation with our kind of color scheme and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and after that, yeah, we got the next release of IHP, which added the breadcrumb API, which is also like a major new thing because it's like part of every new boilerplate project now. So whenever you get a new project in test now, there's breadcrumb API is there, which is just super helpful because it makes sometimes a lot easier to to just change your code and makes it easier also to, for example, integrate Tailwind and other stuff into that, just because like previously when the code generators were generating bootstrap classes, there was nothing you could customize except like manually changing it. We like in the previous release we already did the Docker integration, but with that release we fixed some stuff of that, which kind of also made it possible to so that when you now run an Nix build in an IHP project, it just works and builds a binary out of that without any kind of errors and anything you need to manually set up or something. And that also allowed us later to actually, after that release, to improve, for example, IHP Cloud, because like when the build system just got so much simpler, and that allowed IHP Cloud deployment, for example, to be again much more lightweight and much faster now. So it kind of like played into that as well. Also in that release, we got the new Envara API for the configuration stuff. So we've been initially we aim to have all the configuration in IHP inside the config.hs file, just as Haskell code. But it's turned out this is just. I mean, initially it was a simpler idea, but it turns out just doesn't work so well after all, because it always forces you to recompile sometimes and just makes your application less dynamic as we want to have it. Even though it has its advantages in the sense that it's simpler when you have a binary, the config is already there, could just start it, like it's similar as the advantages of a container. You could just start it and it will run. But it is just not overall fundamentally not a good thing, and we've slowly moving away from that over the whole year. Now the new Envara API kind of makes it out, and even all the previously new features of IHP, like IHP storage, for example, some functions of that required configuration via environment variables. So we are already moving in that direction, and now it's kind of also easier to do that from userland code, basically. In preparation of the data sync API, we actually also added support for PostgreSQL policies in the schema designer in that release, and we also added a new 404 page, which you might have already seen somewhere in your IHP apps. Previously, it was like a more boring page, and now it's a more, I think, colorful page, basically. I think it's just like these small improvements add up to make it like a friendly framework, not a boring framework. And that actually brings us to the last release here. Where we changed the migration workflow again completely to that new approach, the different patch approach talked about. We got the new optional HSX attributes, which is also just a nice addition. That kind of we always worked around previously somehow, but it's like very useful. And was also necessary for some of the form refactorings we done. So in the last IHP release, while it's not in the release notes, we actually did a large refactoring of the form generation code. It was previously built. The form helpers of IHP were built before HSX was added to IHP. So they were built with Blaze HTML syntax directly and not with HSX code. And Amitai actually did most of the work of rewriting that code in HSX code. And then we found some edge cases where HSX was not easily able to express some stuff, and then we added the optional HSX attributes to solve that. Because the font code kind of generates a lot of dynamic stuff. to make the forms kind of customizable. And yeah, also we added like a lot of data sync improvements in that last release, which just makes them much more stable. And also on the JavaScript side, we did a lot of improvements. We got encrypted SMTP, which was very useful added by Handy. I mean, previously, if you were using like something like AWS, I mean, you didn't need the encrypted SMTP, so that's why we, for example, didn't add it before that. And also a lot of bug fixes actually were into that release and performance improvements. For example, auto-refresh has several performance improvements now because the way how we deal with PT notify has changed a bit. So a lot of stuff just is more performant or is generally fixed when it was broken. And I think one of the that's kind of like all the releases actually in the year. So you can see it's actually quite a lot that we shipped over this year. And probably we forgot about a lot of the smaller features. I mean, there were like typically for every release we had like hundreds of smaller commits that just improved here and a few things here and there, just making the overall experience a lot better. And or adding like some kind of like the time function, just adding some functions that you would expect to be there but was not there yet. And and I think one of the coolest things that also just got kind of timing wise very well was that we kind of got the G2 badge, which we aimed to get basically by everybody doing the reviews. So thanks everybody for kind of leaving a review. It was turned out to be a good to be good enough basically for us to be now high performer, which is I think super useful because we gain a lot of visibility in more kind of mainstream software world probably. It just makes IHP also look a bit more professional in the sense that while Haskell is a niche kind of space, we want to move out of that. So kind of like that's and I think we are actually like looking at the motto of Haskell, avoiding success at all costs. I mean, we are doing very poorly at that, I would say. We are probably the most mainstream Haskell framework now. Like now that we are included in the G2 winter web framework report. So I think probably on r/Haskell this will probably be get a lot of hate. Besides that, I was also thinking if some of you were asking, okay, what can I do to improve the Haskell, or what can I do to like maybe support IHP? I think a lot of things kind of we are already doing. Like for example, a lot of people ask questions on Stack Overflow already. I think we just need to do that more. I think that's like super helpful because this makes questions Googleable. So you can just Google a question and find the answer on Stack Overflow. That's like where we aim to be at some point. So all the common questions should be on Stack Overflow. Otherwise, on Slack they typically get lost after a while. So you can't fit on Google. So we are already making progress on that side. And also, there are quite a few people already that did write about IHP in blog posts, and I think if you want to support IHP in any way, just write about it, share your work, or stream it on Twitch, for example. A lot of people did that also this year. So I think that's super useful. If we get more people to spread the word about IHP, I think that's one of the major things we need for next year. Otherwise, I also wanted to share like our progress on GitHub stars growth, because that's like a good proxy for exposure of IHP to other people. And I mean, we we actually hit a kind of major milestone in the sense now that we are one of the top 20 Haskell packages by GitHub stars now. You can see actually our growth in terms of GitHub stars accelerated after we changed the website and the logo. Because I didn't expect that to affect it so much, but it since we did the new website and the new logo, it was like just going much faster. And I think it initially we did a good job at explaining IHP to the very early adopters and people kind of looking into that already. But now we also need to do a better job explaining IHP to people that are just stumbling over it. And and with the new website, we did a much better job on that. I think that helped a lot. I mean, we had much more code samples on the website, and as the video was more prominent and stuff like that, it really helped a lot. So I think a lot of our work we need to do as an IHP community is probably be in the communication space. Just make people aware that IHP exists, that Haskell is not like just a boring programming language used for kind of very niche stuff, but also that you can build major web applications with Haskell, and it's very good at that. And there's a lot of technology actually to build that in a very productive way. And let's continue on that growth curve and hope we maybe can beat some other Haskell packages in the next year. I think it will be hard. There are actually quite a few people that have a lot more stars. But yeah, we will eventually get there. So otherwise we have a short outlook. We can have a short outlook for the next year. I think the elephant in the room is the version 1 release, which we are just not there yet. It's like, for example, with the IHP migration change we did recently, we just added probably some more bugs, and we think we just need to have it in a stable way. So before we kind of tax a version 1 release. So I think we are not that far anymore feature-wise. It's just we need to take a bit more speed out of the feature development for that. So we just need to make a release and then kind of look, okay, let's not change too much of that. And if that's like kind of very stable, then we are ready for version 1. And I hope we can do that in Q1 next year. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. But I was at the beginning of the last year as well, so kind of takes that for that. And IHP data sync, I think it will be also a major thing in the next year, because it's like just makes it so easy to build, for example, mobile integrations or integrate other kind of small single page parts into your application. So it kind of makes it easy to build hybrid applications. And it's kind of underrated right now, I think, because it's still new, but it's much better approach than the server-side components in terms of like just productivity, what it gives you. And it makes it very easy to kind of integrate with a more dynamic kind of web world, with the JavaScript world. And I think it will make IHP applications in the future be much more dynamic than they are right now. And so this is probably will be exciting to see how this will grow next year. And another, like, I think major thing for next year is that we also want to grow the IHP community. If you have ideas how we can do that, or you want to help on that, share your experience with IHP and help other people get aware about it. And I think the last quarter we did a good job with that, based on how many times we were on Hacker News, I think. We probably just need to continue that. So that's the outlook for the next year.